Okay, folks, we are live. This is I have to explain, folks, what happened today, and we're here with Schwarzenstein, one of our members, who is being a very good sport about this because I caught him. Um, we had planned to do this actually next weekend, and I had it scheduled on my Google Calendar for next weekend. But I also scheduled it for today on my my, Google Calendar. So he's here with us, but he's not on camera. But anyway,
Yeah,
say hello, Schwarzenstein.
yeah. Hello, everybody. Yeah, unfortunately, no cameras today, but that's okay. We'll make do with what we have.
We'll make do with what we have. Anyway, you wanted to talk in your email to me a couple weeks ago. You wanted to talk about the goings on in the Ukraine, and I thought, yeah, let's do that. So the floor is all yours. Take it away.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I want to turn it right back on you in the beginning here because
Okay.
my initial thought was why I wanted to talk to you is that being that you taught Russian history, and I have to say that you're I don't think it's your idea, but you've ran with it and introduced it to me. This idea of the two Europes and how that absolutely colors Russian people and culture. So, with that kind of context, what is your opinion of this current conflict?
Well, I think the conflict has several levels to it. At the deepest level, I think that this is a kind of continuing war of the West on orthodoxy. That's at the deepest level because both Russia and the Ukraine are Orthodox Catholic countries. At other levels, though, I think I think the Ukraine has been functioning as kind of the West's big grifting experiment. Think of the Biden, think of the Biden family, but certainly not them alone. It's a it's a GMO experiment. It's as far as I can tell, kind of a rape of Russia scenario in miniature.
You took it right out of my mouth. I've kind of always thought that the way Ukraine was turned, which is basically what happened to Ukraine, is absolutely what they intended to happen to Russia.
To Russia, yes,
so
absolutely.
What we've seen since the fall of the Soviet Union and Ukraine is what we would have saw in Russia.
Yeah,
and I think, and so that I think is part of the loathing the West, or at least certain factions of the deep state of the West, seem to have for Putin specifically, because he put a stop to that, not single-handedly, but it was certainly him at the tip of that charge, the tip of the spear for that. But just, just Russian Federation in general, everything he stands for, because it is a constant reminder to these neocons of how they failed.
And, well, you get a symbolic, in my opinion, you get a symbolic portraiture of this conflict in the two leaders. Zelensky is Jewish. He's basically a shill for Mr. Globaloney. He was a comedian prior to this. And
that's true.
He's part of a government.
Let me ask you real quick. We got it. I'm sorry, I want to say where my internet might be chopping in, but we got to make sure that we don't use the Z. Now you got to understand the Z, the Cyrillic Z has been outlawed in Ukraine, so it's Mr. Zelensky. It's Mr. Zelensky now. I got to give it to the Duran for that one. But yeah, it's Mr. Zelensky. We can't use the Z. We want to make sure.
Well, this is my problem from the get-go. It's the Ukraine.
That too,
English language.
I got to tell you,
but we've been told that they take offense at this. Well, frankly, Slavic languages don't have a definite article.
Correct.
So we're being asked to adjust the English language to a completely different kind of language. It's just nuts. Yep. But we've got Zelensky. I'm going to continue to use these. Use the Cyrillic Z.
Defiance all the way.
Well, they keep changing the rules on us every 5 minutes. So I'm not going to play that game. I'm sorry, But on the other hand, you've got Putin, who is, former KGB. He's a practicing Orthodox believer, and so on and so forth. So you could not get two more mutually opposed sort of symbolic icons of this conflict than these two leaders. And at the deepest level, I have to be, I'm trying to wrap up the question you asked me. My final thought is that the Ukraine has been acting as some sort of international financial hub for Mr. Globaloney and all of his financial shenanigans. And I strongly suspect that as a component of this, that it's acting as a human trafficking hub.
Oh, for sure.
All of the stuff that you and I and other people on this website have been talking about for years in the vid chat. I think this is going on big time.
Well, it's kind of my running theory that all these black holes on the map, so to speak. So in this case, Eastern Ukraine, North Korea, Iran, Saudi Arabia, right? All these countries that are, black holes, right? That's where all this, extra black shit goes. Stuff, excuse me.
Yes.
Black stuff goes on, I think.
Yes, I absolutely think so. And, let's add to this something else. You mentioned North Korea as a part of this network of countries that are black holes. One of the things that I strongly suspect in North Korea's case is that, and we do know that a lot of those very good counterfeit $100 bills are coming out of North Korea. Yeah, the super bills. Well, I suspect that this is a CIA operation that somehow, a la Blacklist, that somebody in the CIA got a hold of the printing plates for $100 bills and has shipped them around the world. We've seen stories like this from Iraq, North Korea. I would not be a bit surprised that the Ukraine has been used as one of these places where they're counterfeiting these super notes. So, on and on we could go.
Yeah, the Blacklist, that's such an interesting show. Folks should watch it. And in regard to the plates, again, it was your research in one of those first McCarthy books you wrote about how the during the war we gave plates to the Soviets,
to the Russians. I know.
To the Russians. To the Russians. Imagine that today, right?
Yeah.
I wish someone should do an article about that.
Well, here's the other problem. If we're giving occupation money plates to the Soviet Union prior to World War II, we're giving away the process of intaglio printing, which is how American money is printed, and we're giving that to the Soviet Union. So we're giving a crucial piece of monetary technology away to a foreign power. So who knows what they've done with it since then. But my problem with the Ukraine is that we were warned in the West by Mr. Putin and others in the Russian government for nearly a decade and a half that this was their red line in the sand, and we ignored it, and so here we are. And the Ukrainians are the poor people stuck in the middle of all of this. It's nuts.
Yeah, and it's of course, it's the Ukrainian people that are the innocent ones. But I have to say, it seems, from what I can gather, it seems the Ukrainian government, or at least the ones that are able to exercise power, are fairly obstinate. In regards to Russia, in regards to peace, anything. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of factionality going on. It's just.
Well, in the Ukraine, in fact there is a large amount of factionality in the Ukraine. Yeah. But the problem is, as far as I can tell, is that after the Maidan coup in 2014, the government, basically it's a puppet government of this country that was installed, and a puppet government that has some horrendous connections to the World War II Ukrainian Waffen SS.
Absolutely. Bandera, Stefan
Bandera, the whole thing. I was recently looking online, Schwarzenstein, of a picture of the so-called independent autocephalous Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Now that's another long convoluted political story.
Interesting.
But there was an icon, a so-called icon in this church, the stylized Orthodox icons with pictures of Bandera and some of his, cronies in the icon.
Yeah.
With halos behind their heads. So they're attempting, I think the West is attempting to split the Orthodox Church throughout all of this process as well. But these factions within the Ukraine, Yankovich, the president of the Ukraine that the coup overthrew, Yanukovych, that he was actually pro-Russian. So those factions still exist. I think they're simply being suppressed.
Agreed, because Yanukovych, I don't even think he was pro-Russian. I just think he kind of played the same role as the other guy, the real deal bureaucrat who kind of took over Ukraine after the Soviet Union. He was a straight up Soviet technocrat. He ran some really interesting defense aspect of the former Soviet Union. I forget his name, but I think he was the president in 92 or 93, whenever.
Oh, yeah, I know who you're talking. I can't recall the name either.
His whole thing was playing both sides, right? Russia and the West, and not really choosing one or the other. And I think that's kind of what Yanukovych was doing. But eventually the West decided, no, you're gonna pick.
Well, there's another dastard in this whole business, and it bothers me that it's not being talked about very much, and that's Germany.
Oh, I was gonna go on ahead then. Let's do it.
Well, the Ukraine, as we know it today, the first attempt to give it independence was at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March of 1918, when the Soviets surrendered to the Central Powers. And, the Austrians and Germans set up basically a puppet country out of the Ukraine. It was called the Hetmanate of the Ukraine. So for about a year and a half, until the guard changed, you had German and Austrian troops in Kiev propping up this puppet regime. So this goes back a long time, and if you watched Merkel and Francois Hollande trying to negotiate those Minsk agreements, it was very clear, to me at least, what Germany's goal was. They wanted to make the Ukraine a kind of another European puppet state, basically, with them in charge of it. So there's another dastard in this mix. And to me, it's very interesting to note that Putin's response to this with making Europe pay Russia for energy in rubles. Yeah. To me, that was a direct shot at Germany. Well, because it really put them, in a very, very bad position.
It put all of Europe in a bad position.
Yeah, but particularly the Germans.
True indeed. But you can see the countries that have tried to say they're not going to do it: Poland and Bulgaria, Russia, and one more. But Russia shut them off. They're like, okay, well, if you don't want to pay, we're not going to send it. But so, speaking of Germany, what the most interesting thing is, I found about Germany's involvement in all this is, so recently, in the past couple of weeks, Russia has put out documents. And here's the other thing. I think, so let me back up. First, for those who aren't aware, who have been watching too much Western coverage of this thing, it does have, quite a long history, but we'll just go back to the Maidan in 2014, right? Mm-hmm. So that was when the coup, they took over. But ever since then, it's basically been what it is now, right? The American stomping ground. Mm-hmm. And there was all kind of atrocities. We have the administration fire at the building of Odessa, where they, burnt those people alive in the building, and, could go on for quite a while about the atrocities committed by these far right nationalist groups primarily.
Well, let's call them what they are. They're Nazi.
There it is. And that's going to be apropos to this little juicy nugget here. So that was 2014. The Donetsk and Lugansk republics decided, they didn't want a part of that. It's against everything we stand for. Referendum, separation, right? Then the conflict. Ukraine calls it an anti-terrorist movement, whatever euphemism they used. And then now the war cracks off in 2014. So 8 years or so we've been running. So this conflict has been going on for quite a while, quite a long time. There's all kind of good documentaries one could watch about it from either side. Now, during that time, it's like Iraq was for the first Gulf Storm. These things become a testing ground. These theaters of war become testing grounds for weaponry and all sorts of things. Another recent example of that is the conflict over the Black Garden in Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia and Azerbaijan, where that was essentially a trial of the drone wars, the Bayraktar drone that they're using in Ukraine to little effect, by the way. You look like you wanted to say something.
No, go ahead. I'm trying to keep track of the chat room too, okay. So I may look a little distracted, but I am listening.
All right. So we see, in my opinion, we see trials and advertisements, if you will, for various defense industry aspects in these different conflicts and theaters. So with that said, there's some interesting drone stuff we can get into later, but it appears that the Ukrainians were getting ready to launch a massive offensive against the two republics, the Donetsk Republic.
Yeah.
And I will add this about the drones real quick. There's what I was going to say is Russia has a lot of documentation. Some they had prior, and some I think they've gained since coming into the country.
Yes.
And I think they're going to just slow drip that out for months.
Oh, I do too. I'm totally agreed.
And there's going to be investigations and So, but they have documentation showing that Ukrainians sent a set of questions to the Turkey, I don't know if the country's Bayraktar or that's the name of the drone, the company, but it's a Turkish company that makes these drones. They sent a set of questions that were all centered around the drone's capability to travel 300 plus kilometers, right, which would bring it into Russia, right. And also its ability to disperse aerosolized materials. Right. And the answers were no, it can't disperse any of that, but it can be modified to do such. Sure. And it appears as though it was. There's, something like 50 or 60 of these modified drones to disperse the aerosolized chemicals that were ordered, and some were delivered. So just ponder that.
Bio warfare.
And that's what I'm getting at here. So the Russians have shown that there is, and this is admitted, even though the West doesn't talk about it, it's a conspiracy theory. Nuland was in wherever she was admitting it, right? So it's not, 19, I think is what the Russians said, the last count I heard, in the teens, bio labs. And guess who was the close partner? Germany.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, they're, if one's under the other, it might be, Russia, Germany, but they seem to, or excuse me, America, Germany, but they seem to be quite hand in hand in this regard, which I find interesting because it wasn't just any biological weapons they were researching. They were researching specific Slavic weapons, such as weaponized Crimean versions of certain fevers and so forth that are, detrimental to Slavic people specifically.
Well, there's another thing that they were doing that I thought was very interesting in this connection, and I don't know if you caught it. You probably did. And that was that they were not only researching things that could specifically affect people of Slavic background, they were also researching anthrax.
Ooh.
And I thought that was interesting because if you were able to genetically engineer a form of anthrax that would be particularly aggressive to Slavic people,
right?
And that would be, quite frankly, a very Nazi thing to do because, as far as the Nazis were concerned, up until about 1942, the Slavs were subhuman. And then all of a sudden they became human enough for the Waffen SS to recruit units.
Right. Yeah, that whole thing is very Nazi-ish. I mean, they even showed, and this isn't even hard to find. It was like Defense Department or Homeland Security Department requests put out for Slavic DNA and Slavic samples of various kinds. And the Russians even sent out a formal request, to whoever, State Department or whatever, saying like, what's this about? What do you mean you want Slavic DNA and so forth? So, you couple all that together with the labs and the Germany being involved and the hardcore Nazi element all through. It's like,
oh boy. And let's remember something else. When there was that business in Georgia and South Ossetia back in 2007 and 2008, there were also rumors of biolabs in those countries back then.
There was.
And the Russians actually published that information as well before they went in And then once they went into South Ossetia, again, they cornered those biolabs and published that information. So from another standpoint, I think we have to look at least Russia's response to this as being of a piece with what they did in Georgia. And once you do it that way, and I don't know if this is where you're going, but to me, Schwarzenstein, it appears that the Russians are really following some sort of long-term strategic game plan. And at the core of that game plan is that they feel that they are under existential threat now from some quarter or quarters in the West. Pardon me.
Well, that idea is interesting because I definitely wrestle with this notion that some of us have shared in the community, myself as well. I don't know how strong I hold to it, but that Russia is, kind of represents a bulwark or a resistance to the globalist agenda,
yes,
such. And I think by and large that is somewhat true. Certainly
I do too.
Ideology, right? You can't
make
two ways about that. Along with Hungary and a couple other countries. So that's true, but I don't know, because what you're saying is that because of this pressure that we've speculated before, whether it's off world, wherever it comes from, there's some kind of pressure these elites or these folks seem to be under, and so therefore they're having to accelerate their situation. Which would then cause Russia to feel threatened, right, in an existential fashion. But all of it seems to be moving faster. So, but you would think, I don't know, the factionality of this thing kind of, gets me lost sometimes. But we can table that. I do want to talk about how the conflict kicked off, because I think that was very interesting. Because, we had the Defense Department or the American intelligence for like a week or maybe 2 weeks talking about, hey, the invasion's going to happen. Biden's up there talking about it's going to be this day, that day, but trying to do predictions. And for the once, they were right. They weren't necessarily right today, but they were right. And it wasn't really, touted as such. And you would think that it would have been like kind of talked about as a win in the media, because they were right in that they did invade and they were predicting that they would, but I don't really think, I know the plan was made, right? Obviously, all these countries have invasion plans drawn up, right?
Right.
But I don't think the plan was to invade. I think the two catalysts for this were primarily, I think it was Zelensky's speech at that Munich Security Conference. I forget the date, a few days before the invasion, which was the 24th of February. So maybe the speech happened the 19th.
No, wait a minute. Let me ask you a couple of questions to clarify something here. What in your mind, what exactly did Zelensky say at the Munich Security Conference that pushed up the invasion? And then the second question is, why do you think that the Russian plans weren't for an invasion?
Okay, so the first part, what Zelensky said was to talk about nukes. He said that restart their nuclear program,
right?
And that's interesting too. I heard this from an Indian commentator I like to listen to, and he was like, "You can bet your bottom dollar no country that has nukes will ever give them up again, ever."
Right.
Because Ukraine could be stated as an example for that. They had quite an arsenal. But then I heard someone else argue that, well, they may have had it, but it would have just been dead weight since all the codes were always in Moscow. So I don't know the details of that, but they did give up the nukes. And supposedly, if you recall, in exchange for security guarantees from Russia and the West, which seems to have fallen apart. So I wouldn't blame them for like, man, we should have never done that. I couldn't blame them for feeling that way. But that was the real catalyst. Zelensky was talking about trying to jumpstart that, and Ukraine wouldn't necessarily have to start from scratch. So that
the Ukraine actually is home to several first-class physicists. So
absolutely, the few outlets that did fair news reporting reported on the fact that it wasn't just beautiful blonde, blue-eyed white folks that were leading Ukraine. There was quite a bit of Southern ethnicities, Asian, Black.
Oh yes, absolutely.
In the universities, right?
Yes.
It's a higher education learning country. Like, I think we get this idea that all these places are backwards if they're
the Ukraine.
Well, just anything that's like east of Europe. How about that? So,
well, the last time I looked, the Ukraine is in Europe, but you're talking about the West, thinking Europe simply means Western Europe.
Correct. Yeah, this mentality. But yeah, it was pretty advanced, and a lot of people go there to study. So
sure.
Yeah, so they could definitely do it. So I think that was like the last straw. I think was that,
Yeah.
and then I believe the other thing was these imminent assault plans. It seems like they were going to start a massive offensive.
Yeah, I wanted you to clarify that, because what people don't realize, at least in this country, is, because it was never reported on, is that the Ukrainians concentrated their military forces against the Donbass and Lugansk so-called republics. They were ready to go in.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's that, plus, as you say, Zelensky's remarks about, well, we need nukes, that really triggered Russia.
Yep.
No doubt.
No, yeah, those are the two things. So then why do I think that invasion wasn't the plan? I'm not saying that in the war plans that were drawn up were obviously invasion plans, right? But what I'm saying is that because there was all that troop movement, where they were on the borders, oh my God, Russia's on Ukraine's borders inside of Russia, and in Belarus and all that, right? So they were moving the troops around. But I think that was just in response to various NATO exercises and movements and, the regular game, right? But another thing that makes me think this is, so in the West, it's spun this way, right? That I don't know how much, right? But some of these soldiers that participated in this Russian offensive were, they thought that they were just on exercises, right? It seems that, so in the West, they're like, oh my God, Putin had to lie to him and yada, yada, yada. No, I think they were just really on exercises. And the decision to do it now was not planned. It was spur of the moment, days before. I don't think this was something they had geared up weeks on end. And again, I know you're not listening to this Western nonsense, but folks got to get the idea out of their mind that, like, their logistics is bad and they couldn't supply. All that is super nonsense. Like, that stuff is like, they don't have to like plan that out too much.
Let me weigh in here, if I may, because I've been watching Western commentators on, the Russian invasion is failing, and now they're pulling back, and they're just concentrating on Lugansk and the Donbass and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, these people have not a clue about how the Russian military operates.
Well, yeah, I'm going to touch on doctrine and theory too.
Well, before you get to your theory, let me toss out mine. Back in World War II, after the failure of the German offensive at Kursk in 1943, if you look at Russian operations up until June of 44, they're concentrating in the Ukraine, okay? And you have this massive buildup of forces in the Ukraine. And Hitler, you can check out Paul Carell's book called Scorched Earth about what Hitler was expecting the Russians were going to try to do. Hitler was expecting the Russians were going to sweep up through Poland and literally cut off Army Group Center and Army Group North. So in other words, he was expecting a thrust from the Ukraine into the Balkans up through Central Europe.
Interesting.
And the Russians launched Operation Bagration in June of 1944, which was absolutely nowhere near where Hitler expected the main blow to fall. And in fact, the Russians had kind of sucker punched him. They pulled a rope-a-dope, to be quite frank with you. So this massive Russian offensive began, and it began right in front of Army Group Center. I mean, it was literally a frontal offensive against Army Group Center, and just absolutely destroyed it. And I'm thinking, okay, here the Russians are concentrating all of these forces around Kiev and so on, and I'm thinking it's another rope-a-dope. and that's exactly what's happened, because they got those Ukrainian forces pinned now in the Donbass, and all the rest was just kind of for show. I really do. The Russians are nowhere near losing this thing. Whatever they're telling you on CNN or MSNBC or Faux News,
It's nonsense.
It's nonsense.
Yeah, because I have,
Anyway, what's your theory?
Well, if I had to pick a word right now, I think I would probably use the word trouncing, because like they're not doing any types of good. I don't, you can tell by these fake retaking of cities that were never taken. I mean, goodness, you could.
I know.
We could have a whole show on just the media nonsense around all this.
Yeah, true.
These fake,
True.
offensives, counteroffensives that it's amazing. So I think Kiev was just pretty much what you said. It was the rope-a-dope. It was half and half, right? So I forgot. If I was at my office, I'd have some of this written down. I forgot the guy who laid out this analysis, or where I heard it from, this notion. But what he was saying was that they did thrust into Kiev, right? Not like a full, because what's the goal here? Are we going to occupy the capital, kill Zelensky, and take it, or are we? What would have been the point of that? Like, what? Let's think through what would have been like. Take it and do what, right?
Exactly.
So come on. So
let me add to what you just said here, because you just made a very important point that people have to latch on to. Russian military doctrine. When the Russians think of decapitation strikes, okay, they're thinking in a very different way about what those mean than the West does.
Big time.
When this country says decapitation strikes, it means getting rid of the government and putting in a new one.
Yep. And in
when
fact,
the Russians think of decapitation strikes, what they're talking about is degrading the command structure, the operational and tactical command structure of units in the field. They're not talking about replacing the government, because in the Russian mentality, you have to have a government in place to negotiate with.
Correct. Yeah, see, that's something else the West doesn't understand. They also don't understand, and it may be a fault of Russia's. I don't think it is, but it may be that the Russians will talk to you while they're actively killing you.
Yes,
and I don't think the West understands that. Like the Russians will negotiate in the middle of a full blown offensive. Like
of course,
that's part of all of this. Warfare is really just another part of diplomacy. Folks tend to forget that, but that is
case in point, Schwarzenstein. Let's remember that in 1941 and 42, when the Germans are absolutely shellacking the Soviets, Stalin does what? Well, he opens up negotiation processes. He's trying to surrender.
Let's at least slow it down. Yeah.
It's just
which by the way, Ukraine seemed to have done 3 times, and the Russians got very pissed off about doing that. All over the map. Turkey, a couple different meeting spots, but Turkey was the last one for these negotiations. And it's that to me made it quite clear that it's America pulling the strings, because he's being told, Zelensky's being told not to accept anything.
Now I have to wonder here, and I'm sure you've wondered too, is it really America pulling the strings?
Well,
or is it the city of London? I mean, the scuttlebutt coming out of Great Britain is just bizarre.
Really?
I mean, it's off the charts insane.
Give me an example. What do you mean? I haven't heard any aspect of this.
Johnson has been talking about, okay, if they want nuclear war, blah blah blah. So in other words, what I'm watching is you're seeing a kind of a 3-way tug of war inside the West between Europe, Great Britain, and the United States. As far as I can tell, no one is home in Swampington, D.C. You've got a grifting president who's up to his earlobes with corruption in the Ukraine.
Oh yeah.
And let's be honest, China.
Yes. Yeah.
So how is this man going to stand up to Russian aggression? In the Ukraine? So I'm looking. I've been watching more what the Brits are saying than what the United States is saying, because the Brits are the ones that are talking the toughest right now, not the United States. The Brits have just recently decided to send all sorts of arms, along with Germany.
Yeah, which was a 180 from Schultz. You're right about Britain, because it's interesting because what's his name? Johnson came out recently and actually admitted that Ukraine's probably going to lose. He said it in a very roundabout way, but and this is kind of the first. It was the first time in any British media certainly that they ever admitted that, like, and that's what's interesting. You can see this shift in the media. It's like it's turning the corner now. Now they're starting to give you all these ways about how it might be kind of tough on Ukraine, and now they're trying to like sugarcoat a Russian victory. Oh, Putin could do this. He has to be able to take back home something to call a victory so he doesn't lose face. Like, what do you mean? It's been a victory. What are you talking about? So let me back up because I know I get irritated when this happens too. The thrust into Kiev, right? The point of that, I think, was to get in there and almost do like a shock and awe in the sense of like just paralyze them by this offensive just coming so rapid, and they're right there in Kiev, bam, that Zelensky would have just negotiated. That was the goal, to get this dude to wise up. Like, look, man, we're in your country. We're deep as hell. We're going to start shooting stuff. Do you want to negotiate? And, he probably would have left to his own devices. But you see what happened. They chose defiance. So then the Russians pulled back. It was never an attack on Kiev. And it also served the other function, like you suggested, of pulling off lots of manpower from the Donbass to try and reinforce Kiev, because they would never let that fall without a fight. So even if he said no, which he did, it served a beneficial function. So that's kind of what I think the whole Kiev thing was about.
Well, you're raising another good point here about Russian military operations. The Russians plan things at multiple levels. With multiple objectives. So in other words, when they launched that offensive on Kiev, they had several objectives in mind, and they're content to settle for any one of them.
Correct. Options with backup
options. Options. This is the way they operate.
Yeah. And then in that vein, I'll also mention, I've seen a lot of nonsense made about, a few Russian commanders being killed, and they're, making a lot of heyday out of it in Western media. And it's like, well, you don't understand that the way the Russians, first off,
their generals lead from the front.
Thank you. Russian average military men in Russia will expect their commanders to be right there with them.
Yes.
Back in the tent stuff with TVs and monitors.
If you study World War II, if you study either,
this isn't just World War II. You can go back to
but my point is, it becomes very evident, especially during World War II, if you study either the Germans or the Russians on the Eastern Front, the generals are right up front. And they have to be there because the only way to lead operationally in a fluid, mobile war is from the front. You cannot be back in a dugout like the generals in World War I, trying to control everything with a telephone.
And here's the other thing, like that being the case, again, this is built into their doctrine, so that when these commanders fell, there was someone right there to take
over.
It's
called staff work, people.
Oh my goodness, there you go. And I might, staff work. So that it was a lot of nonsense, right? So you can tell they're making victories out of nothing. All that would really tell me is that it's just intense fighting. That's all that really says.
Exactly.
There's nothing about how
it just tells. What it tells me, Schwarzenstein, is that the Russians are operating exactly according to their doctrine, and it's going exactly the way they want it to.
I'll mention something else for the audience here. There's been a lot of nonsense made about, where's the Russian Air Force?
Well, jeez.
Let's first back up and understand how the Russians use their Air Force. The Russians tend to use their Air Force in support of manpower. So they're going to take out supply depots, ammo dumps, logistics lines for the force that the manpower is attacking. They use it to support the manpower primarily.
They use it like the Germans use the Luftwaffe. It's flying artillery.
There you go. They're not. They don't necessarily use it for like attack strikes. They do, but it's usually in support of an offensive done by Marines.
Look, the Russians have a strategic air capability. There's no doubt about that.
Well, they own the skies.
And here's the problem. 2-3 days in. No one has seen the Russians using that capability in the Ukraine, because believe me, if they were using that capability, the Ukraine right now would be a wasteland.
You blanked out. I didn't hear what capability.
the strategic capability of the Russian air forces.
Oh yeah.
They're not even using it.
I agree.
If they were, the Ukraine would be absolutely flat on its back, devastated right now.
Agreed. And also on that line, they're not really using anything.
Yeah.
They're using old tanks. I
Yeah.
think the T-72s at the newest, but I don't think there's
Yes.
any T-90s out there. They are using some of the Iskanders, and they
Right.
have used a few of the hypersonic Kinzhal missiles too, just to show you that like we have these just in case. Which, by the way, is also why they did that nuke test on a hypersonic missile. Just to tell all this nuclear talk, like you guys. So I find this interesting and typically Russian. Let me also say this as a sidebar. This crop of Russian diplomats, you know, should be given an award. It's like diplomatic awards, you know. Lavrov, the spokeslady, Sharapova, even Peskov. All these guys are top rate. But I love how the Russians give you some history whenever they answer a question. I think it's great because it's context, you know.
Well, this is the other thing. You compare the Russian diplomats to the Western diplomats, and it's like comparing adults and children.
I mean, come on, look at Blinken. What is this guy?
It's astonishing to me.
Let me just remind you guys, Blinkenstein, by the way.
well, you know, the Russians
related.
The Russians told us exactly what's going on when Sergei Glaziev, you know, I keep going back to that quotation I've been citing for the last 10 years. Yes. And that is, he said, and this was in an op-ed piece, folks. Yeah. This was not something that he just blurted out. So you have to go read the context. But anyway, Sergei Glaziev said, our problem is not the Nazis in Kiev. It's the Nazis in Washington. And in the context, he's not using hyperbole. He's not using a rhetorical device. When he says Nazis in Kiev and Nazis in Washington, that's exactly what he means.
And that was a very sanctioned comment. Like
yes, it was. Yes, it was.
I think that was very, very accurate and very
well. As you've pointed out, if we go and watch what the Russian leadership, from Putin to Lavrov, you know, everybody, even Dmitry Medvedev on occasion, you know, and he's in our camp. He's supposedly an Atlanticist. All right.
I don't think he is, but yeah.
I don't think he is either. At least is not as much as they think he is. But in any case, they've been telling us ever since the collapse of the Yeltsin government, the Russians have been telling us that the West is in the hands of a cabal, and that cabal has lots of money, and they're creating all this chaos in the world, and that globalism, their creature, is not the way Russia's going to go.
Right.
They have been warning us for 20 years, and we haven't been listening.
We haven't been listening to really anything they've said because
exactly.
December was kind of the last straw thing too. That's another precipice kind of moment was when they gave these detailed, written, like itemized proposals.
Excellent. Go with it. I want that. Yeah, people have to hear this.
Yeah,
flesh that out.
They were given these proposals, America and Ukraine, I believe, or America and NATO or EU, whatever. We're given these proposals, like laid out, like, look, we're going to hammer this out. Here's what we got going on. And you're going to give us a response. We'll wait. Mm-hmm. And the response was more nonsense, ideology and nations can choose and the right, all this nonsense. And I think that was a major thing where the Russians were like, all right, we're done with y'all. We're going to move forward on this track of whatever. Like that was a major thing. You know, they didn't like make a big deal out of it, but yeah, that was a major moment.
I want to put that a little bit more into context too, because people really have to latch on to that December message when the Russians presented this country a diplomatic note with all of these questions and inquiries. Okay.
Yeah, just so people don't understand, it was like it had a term. It was a real official, like diplomatic cable, not just like an email. This was an official thing.
This was an official
where we had
diplomatic inquiry, where we had to respond. Yes, absolutely. And of course, you're exactly correct. Our response was a big fluff, a big waffle. All right. Yep. But here's the other problem. That note that you're talking about came after the Russians began to conclude, and this was on the Sakers website. that the West and the United States in particular was not agreement capable.
Yeah, they got a word for it.
They've got a word in Russian that means not agreement capable, and it's a very strong word. That note came after that word began to appear in official government notices in Russia and on the Russian media. So what I suspect is I'm gonna walk that even a little bit further off the limb than you are. I suspect that note was basically the Russians knowing that they weren't going to get a response.
I think they knew they weren't getting it either.
Right. I think that note really was a message to the rest of the world to say, see, these people are not agreement capable.
Yep. And along the lines of that note, folks should also understand, like, the Russians are they're very legalistic in the sense that they will abide by international law as far as it goes. So, a case could be made that even this invasion was legal, especially since of the biowarfare they found, because that's all, contravention. So they would be within legal grounds to run in there. So a case can be made that the invasion is legal. And so they probably will argue that if they get really challenged. But it's just, so what I'm saying is they have a foundation, their arguments that they're not coming off of. And so
the Russians are going to, in my opinion, and you mentioned this earlier, and I want to kind of reinforce what you said, that the Russians have all sorts of information, and then you said, and I think they're going to slowly trickle it out.
Yep.
I absolutely agree with you that that's the game that they're going to play. Mm-hmm. And the reason they're going to play it that way is they are going to ratchet up the pressure on the West by showing its hypocrisy and doing so over and over and over again.
Yep, because they've been doing that. And their mouthpiece to do it primarily has been RT, which is why they've moved heaven and earth to shut that shit down.
Yep.
And I got to say that initially they were quite effective, because there was a period of time where I had a very hard time getting it. Couldn't get it on YouTube. Even when I would go straight to rt.com and get the stream, chop it up, hack it up, all of that, like very actively preventing people from getting it. But just so folks know, you can get it on Rumble, the alternative platforms, Odyssey, and so forth. But it just outlines the effectiveness of that mouthpiece for them.
Now, I have another question for you, Schwarzenstein.
Hit me.
Hit me. All right, here it is. What do you think Russia's response to the West, and particularly to the United States, is going to be in terms of asymmetrical warfare, and, to be more specific, cyber warfare?
Okay, interesting. So I was almost going to touch on this when you mentioned the conflict in South Ossetia in Georgia, because that conflict is quite enlightening in regards to several things, how Russian fights its modern wars and so forth, because same thing with Syria, you can see quite a few parallels. But in this case, it's more of a contrast in that we're not seeing what was done standard, so to speak, in the South Ossetia thing. And that's a product of the fact that Putin, I don't think this wasn't an easy decision for Putin, because let's recall, these are all Slavic people. They're essentially brother nations. Putin absolutely views them as all one people. So this is also another thing the West has just been running away with. The Russians, to the point where in the RuNet, right, the Russian net, Putin's been getting quite a bit of flack and feedback from people saying he's being too soft, because there's been like a directive put down there to don't kill a lot of people, go around the civilians. So it's clear the Russian military has been given, I won't say an order, but a directive to not harm civilians. And they're doing that quite well, but it's causing them losses. And that's where Putin is getting a lot of heat for doing that. Yes. They're not going in. I mean, just, let's compare Mosul with Mariupol. I mean, we absolutely flattened Mosul immediately within a week. Every kind of transport infrastructure, yada yada. It's like no one stops to think, how are all these shill Western media folks and the few guys who are talking on the Russian side, how are they even broadcasting their little shows from Kharkov and from Kiev and from Ukraine?
Right.
Like, did you see that in Mosul? Did you see that in Aleppo?
Right.
No, because the way America does things, we come in there and destroy all of that immediately. You're not going to call anyone. Are you serious? You better pull out a string and a can. All that is done. So that should show you right there. The Russians were not trying to destroy infrastructure and all this. They were trying
again, they could easily do.
Could have done it. And they did in situations where they had to.
Right.
Example, the major shopping mall in Mariupol. The Nazis ran up in there to hide. And so the Russians were like, look, we're going to bomb it in about 2 hours. So if you're a civilian, you might want to move around. And they completely destroyed that building. They destroyed all of Mariupol, unfortunately. But so, they've been taking a hands-off approach. And again, he's been getting heat for that. I forgot why I mentioned that to you, but that's the way they've been kind of conducting themselves.
Yes, I agree. And well, my question was, what do you expect the Russian asymmetrical warfare?
That's right. I'm sorry. I'd be going around Harvey's barn like you.
No, I think what we do here.
Yeah. I'm in good company then. So, yeah, I think they will engage the cyber thing. And the point I was beginning to illustrate was that in that Georgia campaign, that's what they did first. They came in. It was a hybrid offensive. So they came in with hacking first. They shut down all of the government networks. All of that was shut down before the soldiers started coming in. And that seems to have been part of the way.
But my question, let me be more specific. Do you think or expect that the Russians are going to increase or step up or initiate asymmetrical warfare directly against this country as a result of all of this?
This country being the U.S. or the Ukraine?
The U.S.
Yes,
but do.
Not in any major way. And this may be to Russia's detriment. I think so. It's clear that Russia is losing the media war, right? In my opinion, it's clear. Just because no one's really, people have to want to look for alternative information. And if you don't actually want to find it, you're not going to see it. So they're losing that. But I don't think they care. And when it comes to on the ground, it doesn't matter. A great quote from Scott Ritter, the former UN weapons inspector. Great analysis on this conflict as well. And he said that it's about boots on the ground and steel in the body. And he was like, right now, there's Russian boots on the ground putting Russian steel in Ukrainian bodies. And so that's all that matters. So I don't think the Russians really care about the media thing, to their detriment, perhaps. But it's certainly going to have no outcome on the war, on fighting.
Well, I suspect something rather different than Mr. Ritter. I've been kind of watching his analyses too. But I actually think that the United States, particularly since in the last couple of weeks, the Russian leadership, and particularly Mr. Putin, have notched up the rhetoric to the extent that they now are openly saying they're at war with NATO.
Well, okay. Who said that?
Well, it's coming from different portions inside the Russian government, but I think Mr. Putin himself has said this.
So there has been that talk, but there was a direct quote. So it may have been intimated, but there was actually a direct quote from Lavrov saying, NATO thinks it's at war with Russia, but Russia's not at war with NATO. So that was an official statement. Now there may have been intimated, intimated, so forth, but it seems that Russia was trying to put forth the official idea that no, we're not at war with NATO, although they may think that. Right. So I don't know what that means,
Well, in any case, with either interpretation, I think what the West has to realize is that Russia's taken the gloves off.
Oh yes.
And this means that, in my opinion, that you're going to see a slow, gradual turning up of the heat in terms of asymmetrical warfare inside.
I see what you're getting at.
Yeah, I really do. I go back to that very strange attack on the California electrical substation about
Mm-hmm.
8 or 9 years ago, and then we had those internet attacks in San Francisco and Arizona and so on and so forth.
Yep.
I think you're going to see more and more of that kind of stuff. And the interesting thing is, and here I'm going to run something else by everybody. My suspicion, Schwarzenstein, is that a lot of that activity, like 9/11, is going to be coming from our own deep state.
Right.
But I think the Russians are clever enough to use that activity for their own shenanigans.
I mean, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I find it very intriguing that Putin, being a judo belt of some degree, like that's what he's doing to a large case.
Yep.
Like, give you an example. All these Javelin missiles America has just decided to give to Russia because I know you won't see it in the West, but the Ukrainians, when they abandon all their positions in mass, where do you think they're going to carry these 100-pound javelins? No,
look,
they leave it.
I'll go you one step further, Schwarzenstein. I suspect strongly, because there was just a couple of articles that came out, that we don't even know where the weapons that we're giving the Ukraine really ultimately end up.
Oh, yeah, I would agree.
I suspect we really do know where they're ultimately ending up. We're using the Ukraine and these weapons deals, and we're using the Ukraine as transshipment point.
I can see that.
And that the weapons are coming back to the West to arm terrorists, terrorist cells and so on and so forth.
So I can definitely see that and agree with it. But this is, the question I have. And when me and Blake Cosmos were discussing all this, I wanted to give a name to this cache. But I'm speaking about the Afghanistan weapons. Where are they? So let's put this into frame here. We're talking about multiple billions of dollars.
Yep.
Given to the Ukrainian. So really what they're kind of getting a mixture of both. Primarily, they're just getting old Soviet stockpiles from these Eastern European countries. In truth, that's mostly what they're getting.
Or old German stuff.
Correct. Yeah, but all Soviet era stuff.
Right.
Which is also how you can tell when it's the Ukraine who's responsible for killing civilians because of the weaponry that's being used. But
exactly.
So, all these weapons are just flooding in, and we now have a second cache, right? Just label the Afghan cache, the Ukraine cache. But what is being done with these weapons? They're being collated and collected in these. So initially I thought, okay, what they're going to do with the Afghan cache is they're going to use it to destabilize, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all of these countries.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah. Doff my hat.
Right. Play the same game.
Yes.
But I'm not... maybe just on a bigger scale than I thought, because now they're doing it in Asia as such, and then also doing it right with Ukraine. So it's like maybe, yeah.
I have to stop you here because I really want people to latch on to what you just said, because it's hugely important. I think you are spot on. I'll doff my hat again. I think you are spot on about the Afghanistan cache being used as a weapons supply for whatever they've got planned for the old Soviet Central Republics. Because if you are serious about trying to contain Russia, the way to do it is there. You ain't going to be able to do it in Europe because, like it or not, Russia's the king there.
Oh yeah, you can see.
So that's where. And in fact, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there was just an article from that Brit lady that wants to make NATO global. Okay, God. Yeah, this is coming out of Great Britain. This is not coming out of the United States. The British want to make NATO global. But she went on to say that the purpose of it is if the West is going to engage and defeat Russia, it has to do so in those old Soviet Central Republics. And she's
really,
oh yes.
I guess I didn't hear the tail end. I thought she was just saying that.
No!
I thought it was so funny. I thought she was saying it because
no. This is
China. I thought it was about China.
This is the scuttlebutt that's now making its rounds in the Council on Foreign Relations.
Interesting.
And again, that would also be directed against China, Because if you're going to split Russia and China and put an end to the Silk Road project, where's the best place to do it? Central Asia.
Central Asia.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
So I think you're spot on. I think you've just fingered Mr. Global on his next big geopolitical game. Or as I predict it probably will end up being Mr. Global on his biggest next global fiasco.
Global mistake.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I thought it was about the pivot to China because you even had Stoltenberg saying something to that effect about how NATO might need to focus on China, which I just find ludicrous. Like, what is NATO? What's the acronym stand for again? Okay,
North Atlantic. Yeah, exactly.
That's an overreach. So I'll give you my macro theory right now while it's fresh in my mind. So
sure.
And not just with Ukraine, but just kind of like an overall, right? So I can't bring myself. We talk about how our American government and our deep state, are like Biden, right? Sometimes, certainly not as bad as him, but you know what I'm saying. We tend to think that they fumble and so forth. Not really, though. Like in real life, these people are obviously very intelligent in a ruthlessly cunning kind of way. So I'm not prepared to just think that they're out here freewheeling it to that degree. I can't really believe that when we get to the end of the day. I do believe they're in echo chambers. They're surrounded with yes men. I do think they can't critically think outside the box, all of that. However, they, whether it's by advantage, they're not stupid to that degree. So with that in mind, I was thinking it can't be the point to antagonize Russia and China at the same time. It's quite clear you cannot fight both of them. You probably can't even fight one of them. So what are you doing? And this is my thought. Tell me what you think. So what sparked it was the sanctions. It seems clear to me that the only people being hurt by the sanctions, primarily Germany, right? It's always let's keep Germany down for heaven's sake, but Europe as a whole.
Well, like I say, don't put a helmet on them.
Yes. So, yeah. So, Europe as a whole seems to be the one suffering under these sanctions, not America and certainly not Russia. Good God. Right. This economic shock and awe they thought they were going to do has been an absolute failure, unbelievably failure. And what's her name? I forget her name, but she should be given an award too, the head of the Russian central bank. Anyways, she's great. But I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, Doc.
That's okay. One of the
things. My macro theory. I'm sorry. My macro theory.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, spit your thing out. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the thing about the sanctions regime that we're trying to impose is it should be evident to anybody that's following the news that the Russians were fully prepared for that.
Absolutely.
And they had their counter responses all lined up and waiting. And here's the bad news, folks. We haven't even reached the bottom of their list of counter reactions to sanctions. We're not even anywhere close.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Anyway, really. your macro theory.
Yeah. I don't know if it's my internet or yours, but there's just a little bit of lag time and skipping out, but we're good now. You can hear me, everything?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. It's a bit of a lag, but that doesn't matter. So the macro theory, you're right. The Russians haven't responded at all. The only response they really did was this rubles thing, which is extremely light, but they haven't retaliated in any form in regards to that. But so the macro thing, since Europe is the only one really suffering behind these sanctions against Russia, it seems to me, knowing that they can't live without Russian gas and oil, right? It's just not feasible as we're seeing unfold now. So it seems to me that what's going to happen is, and it's already kind of happening, European countries are going to be quietly making deals with Russia. Certainly Germany needs to, or their heavy industry's gone.
However,
well, let me finish. I'm gonna give you the whole thing in a nutshell real quick. So,
okay.
Via the sanctioning of Russia, it hurts Europe, causing Europe to make under the table deals with Russia, therefore strengthening some ties, right? Because America has worked to break down ties between Russia and Europe. Now, what I'm positing is America's working to reunite them. They're doing it by straining Europe via these sanctions, putting them under pressure, knowing they will under the table deal with Russia.
All right, gotcha.
Putting it all together, right? Making them be friendly with Russia again. Then we can all be one family against China.
Okay. But Schwarzenstein, there's a problem with your macro theory.
Let me hear it.
And your macro theory, you're going to think, oh, there's a curveball, and maybe the macro theory needs to go in this direction rather than the one you just outlined.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard, but the moment that Germany decided that it was going to knuckle under and send some obsolete weapons systems to the Ukraine, guess what the United Kingdom announced?
What?
Via a former head of MI6.
What's that?
Huge gas deposit discovered under the North Sea.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, that I find supremely interesting because...
Well, supremely interesting because the city of London does not make announcements like that higgledy-piggledy. It was
also
carefully timed.
There's no such thing as coincidence.
Exactly.
How is it we just happen to discover a massive field in the middle of a massive gas crunch?
Yes, exactly.
So
Exactly.
I don't buy that for a split second.
No, I don't either. But my point here is, again, it's the United Kingdom. It's not this country. It's not asleep at the wheel Biden and co. That's doing all of this stuff. It's the United Kingdom. And again, I go back to what I said after the Brexit vote. Watch, folks. You're going to see the United Kingdom play the Commonwealth card in a big way. And to me, it looks like they're certainly doing it. With this gas announcement, it's like, okay, Germany, take your choice. It's Russian gas or American gas or our gas.
Well, yeah. And what it seems they've been doing so far, at least, is still getting Russian gas, but finding clever workarounds. So one of the most recent ones I heard is they can play games with these blends, and apparently, if it's 49 or 50% and above,
right,
all Russian oil, then it's considered Russian oil, right?
Right.
So if it's like 49 and below, it's not considered Russian. So they can play with it that way, and then they label it.
Right.
You can dig into the the real heavy duty oil traders markets and communications and stuff, and you can get the names of the blends. It's I think it's like Turkish blend. Funny enough, it's something like that.
Well, I'll go you a step further with the blends, and let's go back to the Russian response to the sanctions with the announcement. Okay, then you can buy our gas in rubles.
Yeah.
Well, I suspect that what you're really watching here is something else taking place, particularly with the British announcement about the gas. Because what I suspect you're going to see everybody following Russia's lead and recommoditizing their currency. Now, this is bad for the euro. And let's remember, at the heart of the euro is Germany. It's the old Deutschmark gone international. Okay. Right. To commoditize the euro, the Europeans have to have something to offer. And they don't have anything really to offer in terms of commodity. They've got manufactured goods and so on and so forth, but nothing in terms of commodity. Bingo. Great Britain has things to offer in terms of commodity. The United States could certainly, if it wanted to, attempt to commoditize the dollar. And I think that's what you're seeing with states with the bullion depositories and all of that. South Dakota and Tennessee being the most recent two. Okay. So I suspect that this is the other thing that you're watching here. The Russians used the Ukraine to break the fiat money system. And now it's going to be a mad scramble. I really think
the other thing with sanctions they've just shaped out to be economic seppuku because
bingo
doing is very
off my head again. It's exactly what it is.
Yeah, these folks, they keep it up like this, and the dollar is gonna be looking like the Baghdad. What was that?
The dinar. Yes. Yes, save your Federal Reserve notes.
Yeah, and then gonna start popping up. You buy $10,000 today, and they'll be worth $100,000 in 2 years or whatever.
Wow! I know, it's absurd.
Yeah, and so one's got to wonder why they do that. Now, let me posit a possible theory. So
Sure.
I found it interesting when Olaf Scholz was here in America with Biden. I don't remember when this was, a few weeks ago.
Poor man.
I know he's garbage. I feel look, anyone, even though Merkel gets like all this credit as being like, I mean, I'll give her a little bit of credit. I'll give her credit on the strength of being the quantum whatever she is. You know, they don't even have that degree over here in America. You know, and people don't even know that about her. But
listen. There's a scandal in Germany about did she really do that degree?
don't say that. No, I don't like her at all if she don't got the degree. But you know, she's given this credit as like some kind of supreme stateswoman or something. And I don't see it. To me, she was just a waffle. All she kind of did was, you know, float. The other side was, you know, doing the thing. And I can't believe she shut down all Germany's nuclear plants.
Oh, I can. I can.
Amazing. But that kind of segues into what I was going to say. So when Olaf was here, I love paying attention to how the translation game gets played, you know, in various countries. Because, you know, we know, for example, Putin can very well speak English and German, but yet he plays like he can't. It makes them translate, knowing full well he can. So, you know, they do this on purpose, certain world leaders and so forth. So Olaf Scholz was given the thing, and he got jammed up because there were obviously German reporters there too, with American reporters, and they were just kind of firing at him, English, German. And he got jammed where he started responding all in English. So he let it be known he can do that. And he kind of let something slip where he said that Germany is going to be going 100% hydrogen. Oh yeah. Now that to me, I found extremely interesting for a number of reasons. One, and he also said something along the lines of the infrastructure already being, you know, almost in place.
He just let a huge one out of the bag.
And he didn't mean to, because his face got all red, and then he started to only talk in German after that. So he did not mean to do this. He really let something slip. And so just the idea, and now this isn't just, you know, any country, this is Germany, all right?
Yeah.
You know, bread and butter is heavy tool and die out here, manufacturing, which needs energy. How are we going to do that, right? So all hydrogen. And I forget, it might have been Blake Cosmos I was talking to. I think, because hydrogen to me represents like a halfway measure, all right? So your idea, which I think is absolutely spot on, and doffing my hats to you, that the physics and the finance are intricately laced. You will never see free energy technology until you see an open systems finance, and vice versa.
Right.
We're seeing these being set up, right? Cryptocurrency, or that platform, blockchain, if you will be the open systems. But even that is kind of, because that's what hydrogen is. Hydrogen, being the most abundant element in the universe, would, you know, technically not be free, but like damn near, you know? So it's a halfway measure. Just like cryptocurrencies, it's open, it's free, it's all that, but it's really not. These are still ways to have a quasi-open systems, physics and finance, they can still control. Then they can leak some of the tech.
Let's talk about hydrogen for a minute. I think what he just let out of the bag, if you've been following the fusion story, there's two countries in particular that every now and then release the latest astonishing fusion results: China and Germany.
Okay.
And I strongly suspect that in both cases, both countries are releasing things way behind what they've actually done privately. Yeah. If Scholz said that, then my guess is he's privy to some things, experiments that have gone on in the Planck Institute or Darmstadt or whatever.
Sure.
And that he knows what's coming down the pike. That's my guess.
Let me mention something, since you talked about the fusion experiments. I don't know if this is Mandela effect, or I could have misread, but I didn't. So I saw two stories separated maybe by like a day or two. Okay. One was from a Chinese lab, right? And these are all tokamak things we're talking about, right?
Right.
One was the Chinese lab, and they claimed a burn of a tremendously long time, in my opinion. Like, I think it was like 2,000 seconds or whatever. It was a long time. All right. Real long. And then 2 days later, I saw what I'm pretty sure was a British article. And they were claiming, and both of these articles were kind of claiming like, record-breaking burns for the length of time. But the British record was like several orders of magnitude less, but it was still claimed as a record-breaking length of fusion burn. And I'm like, what? And I know, Dr. Farrell, I know I did not misread. I know I didn't.
I have not heard the one about China and
and I may be incorrect on the numbers, but what stood out to me was that both claimed to be like a record-breaking thing, but the British claim was orders of magnitude less than the claim from China. And I'm like, that just can't be a little mistake. Like it was, let's say if the Chinese thing was 2,000 seconds, the British were claiming 20. It was significantly less.
Well, what I have always found curious and highly questionable about the whole fusion story is that in 1965, Philo Farnsworth, the inventor of television,
plasmator,
the plasmator and the fusemator, these little softball-sized devices that he came up with, that he was claiming to have sustained fusion burns of a half a minute, and in one case, I think as much as 2 minutes, with these just very small little devices.
They were so small.
They were very small. And of course, he made his public announcement, I think 65 or 66, at a press conference. And then ITT, which owned the patents, swept him and every mention of those devices out of the news totally. Swept him and every...
Sorry.
No, that's okay. So in other words, my problem with the fusion story is, Farnsworth was there very early on and apparently made it work in devices that were very small, very practical, very inexpensive, and not these gigantic $150 million tokamak, magnets, and, which makes me question the whole ETAR narrative. But what I'm getting at here is I think that this buttresses your comment about Schultz letting something out of the bag when he was over here.
Yeah.
It has to, and Germany is a big, Germany is the majority stockholder, so to speak, in CERN, in ISCAT, and has a big stake in the ETAR reactor in France. So I'm not surprised that he said something like that at all.
Yeah, I'm quite sure he is knowledgeable about it, for sure. But I just thought of an article I think that you put out there, but it was a patent that Lockheed had filed for a fusion reactor to fit on the pickup truck.
Yeah.
So and that's like almost maybe creeping on 10 years old now.
Remember, yes, I put out that article about the Lockheed reactor, and remember that the Lockheed company took out a commercial and was running this commercial. And if you looked at the commercial when they're talking about their reactor that fits on the back of a pickup truck, what you see is a scaled up version of Farnsworth plasmator and fusement.
You did say that, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's very evident.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest,
Yeah, they've been lying about this for years, and if this is the case and they're planning to commoditize everything, then fusion, if they're going to base a financial system on that, it's going to be very interesting to watch. Well, because again, look at the people that have made the big fusion breakthrough announcements. China.
Yeah.
Russia has it on a couple of occasions. Germany, India on a couple of occasions. So in other words, the countries that are heavily involved in these fusion experiments, making these announcements, are also countries that are leading the way to try and redo the entire financial system.
Yeah, is that a coincidence? Gee.
No, no, I don't think so.
And again, like the main uniting factor in these things to me is they're halfway measures. They're not truly open, open systems. They're still able to maintain control, and that I think is the fundamental issue, because, like you stated, and anyone who's kind of read in these alternative physics ideas, we're not talking a lot of money. You could do this in your garage with the know-how and what, 100 grand at the most, maybe. I don't know. It's very feasible.
It's not difficult.
Right. And so the problem that they've always encountered is how do we, keep tabs on this somehow?
Well, this is my problem, with the claim to the blockchains being the open system. It's not.
It's not.
Those systems are not open enough, and they're not secure. I mean,
and no one knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. So come
on. Well, that's the problem.
You're going to put your life savings into a situation that no one knows who created or essentially owns it, so to speak.
But there's one country that we've been talking about that is absolutely going to be on the last, the last car in the train on this whole energy thing and commoditized money, and that's the Ukraine.
Yeah, well, if there is a Ukraine.
Well, I mean, look at it. They're involved in a war that they cannot win.
Nope.
Unless they have the West itself entering the war actively and open.
Yeah, boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground. That's the only way that they're going to win it. And
even that's iffy, because let me just say real quick, let's not forget, Ukraine, for 8 years at least, is a fully NATO trained army.
Yes.
And
it's not doing too well.
Not at all. And I would even suggest they are quite motivated to fight. And I won't take nothing away. These guys have been fighting.
Right.
Let's not, they're losing badly, but they're fighting. They're fighting. Yeah. But Russia is fighting NATO, and they're winning.
Yeah, that bingo. Thank you for pointing that out.
They're not,
because if this is a test bed, what it's showing us is the NATO army, the NATO trained armies, and let's face it, that means either the Germans, the Brits, or the United States or the French are really training the Ukraine's forces. It's one of those four countries, probably all four, when you get right down to it.
Well,
and they're being trounced, pardon me, by Russians using obsolescent Soviet era equipment.
Right. Right. They're not like to face anything new, even if NATO was to get involved. So yeah.
Exactly. So the way I'm looking at this is this war is showing up shortcomings, massive shortcomings in NATO doctrine.
Yeah, big time.
In NATO operational capability.
Oh, NATO security guarantees.
Yes, in NATO security guarantees and in equipment.
Yeah, that too. That
too. Pardon me. Pardon me. I've had a very, very bad dry throat problem. Ever since the heart attack and no, Shiloh, you go lay down. Go lay down.
I'm about to say, does she need to take a quick bathroom break? We can maybe.
Well, I think she probably does.
We can go ahead and do that.
But it's going to take me probably about 15 minutes. So let's take a little break here, and we'll just be. Yeah, I'm okay, folks. For the people asking in the chat room, it's just my heart medicine makes my throat incredibly dry. So anyway, I'll take Shiloh and run her outside and pick up my mail and all that good stuff, and I'll be back in about 15 minutes, Schwarzenstein.
Okay.
Okay, little girl.
I'm not in the chat, or I would read and try to see what folks are saying.
Okay. There's your treat. Oh boy. Oops. I'm sorry about that, Schwarzenstein, and folks, all you people in the chat room.
No problem.
Listening. Anyway, I forgot where we were, but I was fortunate to get her outside because she had to go.
Good.
Anyway, where were we?
I'm not sure, but let's mention the well. First off, let me mention von Clausewitz. This is a German, I believe, World War I. Go ahead.
19th century Prussian.
Thank you, Prussian.
Yeah, not World War I.
He in talking military theory and so forth, he had the best. What's the best way to win a war, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he basically had like three options or whatever. One was, taking the capital, right, of the country that you're attacking.
Right.
The other one was, honestly, I forget what the second one. I'm sorry, but the third one, the one that's relevant here, was to attack or essentially decapitate the army.
Right.
And that seems to be what the Russians are doing. And part of that is this notion of the cauldrons. Hold on one second.
Right.
These cauldrons. So what they've been doing is they've been encircling Ukrainian army formations, and essentially putting a big circle around them, these penny packets, and they isolate them. And so A, they cannot offer support anywhere else. B, they can't be resupplied. So they're just sitting there doing nothing, and the Russians will go ahead and take them out at will. And in fact, a lot of those people have been surrendering. Another thing that's very quiet is the sheer amount of regular Ukrainian army, not the nationalist battalions and the National Guard folks. Those were find most of the Nazis. But the Ukrainian army has been surrendering, quite a few.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned von Clausewitz, because that doctrine of taking out the enemy's army or military forces, in other words, take out the enemy's ability to wage
their ability to make war. Yes.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's been standard military doctrine ever since him. And it's very interesting to watch, because this is exactly what the Russians, as you've pointed out, this is exactly what the Russians are doing in the Ukraine. Yeah. This is not a failure of
that's
Russian
army. These people talk about a failure like you don't even, in order to say it's a failure or not, you got to know what they're trying to do.
Exactly.
And even with these, these ideas, how they're operating, that may be right. But like,
well, the other thing here is you're also correct in that, as far as I can tell, I'm with you here. As far as I can tell, the units that are not surrendering are these extremist fascist
battalions.
And many of and here's the point here, folks, to bear in mind, many of those units are under the direct control of Western security corporations and not the Ukrainian military at all.
Here comes the thorn in the bower when we get to talking about Azovstal in Mariupol.
Go for it.
Yeah, so the largest And I would have thought that the Essen plant, Kruppstahl would have been bigger, but apparently not. I guess they're saying this Azovstal is the biggest steel factory in Europe, and it's massive. It is literally a compound. It's like a city in and of itself, and that's supposedly where these nationalist battalions are held up with a great amount of civilians. Although I think these are just their wives and children. Not that makes them any less civilian, but there you are. They seem to have found themselves in this, and not found. They went here deliberately because this thing is like an underground warren. Apparently, all sorts of underground passages and so forth that one would think they've been trying to fortify. Which it's going to do them zero good. So let's first back up and say that it was primarily, well, really just only these nationalist battalions. As Russia came into Mariupol, what's also interesting is how Russians are attacking these various cities, because they typically, if they can, right, if that particular city has enough manpower for them, they will hit it from, they'll come in from the north, or they'll come in from the top, the right, and the bottom, leaving a funnel west. Get out of here. Go west. We don't care. Get out of here. So they're funneling these cities west, which is an interesting approach. So that's where everyone tends to flee. But these battalions, they then hold themselves up in the Azovstal factory.
And let me interject here one thing before you continue about Mariupol and the Azovstal factory. I strongly suspect that factory was, with all of the rats warrens of tunnels and so on and so forth, that this was a Soviet era black facility.
Agreed.
That whatever it was manufacturing had something to do with Soviet black projects, and this is one reason that the West has placed all of those units there.
Interesting. Okay, so you're suggesting that they didn't. So the way it's coming across, at least from the Russian side of the news, on the West, they're valiant defenders and all that, but on the Russian side, they, that was the only place they had left. Right. After retreating, it was only Azovstal. So you kind of get the idea that they were backed into that corner, which could be true.
It's something that they are trying to protect, recover, make the battle prolong long enough so that they can recover something. But there's another aspect. It's what I'm arguing. There's another layer that neither Russia nor the West are talking about here.
Very true. So what I thought it was basically NATO commanders, because we've had three attempts, and these in themselves are supremely interesting. Okay, so 2 of them were helicopter attempts. There were 3 helicopters sent. They were literally like attacks. They thought that they were going to attack and get these guys out.
I hadn't heard that.
Oh yeah. So let me I probably won't remember all the interesting details, but so 3 helicopters, certainly the first time. The second one might have been less, but first one was 3 attack helicopters, and it's like they tried to get these guys out by force, which just is a doomed event from failure. Like the Russians have enveloped this place. It's under siege. What, you're not gonna come on. So these guys die and the planes are gone, and it's like the Ukrainian Air Force is past crippled. By the end of the first week, it was gone completely. And then we get these ghost of Kiev nonsense, right? So the Air Force was non-existent, but you're going to waste good pilots, good helicopters on a pointless mission twice.
That means desperation, and that means there's something vitally important.
So then on the third shot, third time's the charm, third shot, in the middle of a ostensibly civilian convoy, a merchant convoy of vessels, I believe it was a merchant vessel that then broke off and approached from, I believe they're in the Azov Sea or Black Sea, break off, and they start approaching the port at Mariupol. And of course, right away, the Black Sea fleet starts look, stop it, or we're going to blow you up. They ended up blowing them up, right, or shooting them down, or whatever, shooting at them. But apparently, some of the chatter was picked up, and what was heard was the guy was saying that whoever was on the boat that was attempting the rescue, they said, forget who they were addressing, but they said their name was Monster, and they were here. We're here to pick you up. It was very short. It was like, so-and-so, this is Monster. We're here to pick you up. That was the only transmission. Now, again, this is coming from the Russian side. Everything they say is propaganda, so whatever. But that's where it's coming from. And that's the only source we would have on this anyways. But that's what they said. But
what you're saying there just kind of cements my opinion that there is something about that Azovstal
Oh, I
factory.
like your suggestion. I had never thought of that. What seems to be going around like on the RuNet, aside from alien bodies under Azovstal and all that nonsense.
Of course,
it seems to be that like folks are thinking that. Now, here's the other interesting factor. It seems to be that there's some kind of connection with France, because prior to the election, Macron was trying really, really hard to get whoever's in Azovstal out, or maybe someone specific, because there was a whole bunch of back and forth calls between Putin and.
Now, I have heard that there have been members of the Légion étrangère in
Foreign Legion.
The Foreign Legion.
Yeah, that's
there.
Or it was Foreign Legion and NATO commanders. What's been kind of
yeah. I'm suspecting that, that would certainly be important enough to risk something like that, because once the Russians expose that, then
correct.
But I really do think there's something else there for all of those NATO people to be there in the first place.
So it's like on the one hand, what we're saying then is that if it's NATO commanders or French Foreign Legion, then what you're saying really that these guys have been embedded with Azov Battalion the whole time, because that wasn't like their home base. They were funneled there. So that's if you're saying it's NATO commanders, French Foreign Legion. So the dirt would be that these guys have been with the Nazis the entire time in Ukraine. And that's bad, sure enough. But your suggestion, I like 7 times more, because if it is the biggest steel factory in Europe, just by nature of that, it would have to be involved in some, black level stuff.
Well, as I recall, that factory is a Soviet-era facility.
It is. And if that's the case, there would be no other foundry capable of doing certain things.
So
right. By virtue of that, it would be involved. So that's
here's the other part of this that makes me think that there's something going on here in this war of a covert nature that we're not being told, and it may have directly to do with that factory. And that's the recent elections in France, because to me, it's very clear that there was some heavy hanky-panky involved in getting Macron reelected.
Oh yeah, they cheated.
Yeah, I think they did, because I think Le Pen was
she might, I don't know if she won, but I think she came closer than I think.
Oh yeah.
It was 56 Macron, the remainder her 44.
Yeah, Mr. Globaloni, has fixed 2 major powers election.
They have
us and the French, and that means that they are, number one, desperate to hold on to their power, and number 2, there's a reason driving them to these kinds of, because what they're really playing around with are populations that are getting fed up.
Yes, yeah.
So they're willing to risk that for a reason. And that makes me think, again, like you mentioned earlier, that I've maintained all along, that they're under some kind of pressure from somewhere else.
Somewhere, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I think they're going to do, or what they should do, so they need to get rid of Biden, and for any number of reasons, right?
Oh, yeah.
Ukraine, whether it's he's now, whether it's China, whatever, he's got to go. So, and it would seem to me that it needs to be done prior to the midterms, because what's going to happen is the Republicans, it seems safe, are going to sweep that. They're going to take the House. All right. So then they'll be in the position of being able to impeach Biden. And what I think they're going to do is probably impeach both of them, because if the Republicans take the House, it will be a Republican speaker, thus the president. Because if you impeach Biden, that brings Kamala. No one wants to see her. No. So you got to impeach both of them as an administration. Okay, bam. Then who becomes president? Well, third in line is the speaker. It would be a Republican. That'd be like a de facto cheat into the White House. But they could do that quite easily if they get the midterm election thing. So the Democrats or the DNC is going to have to move prior to the elections. What they should do is go ahead and hang this entire Ukraine thing on Biden. And it may be in every aspect of it, from his son, the laptop, Burisma, the war, all of it, the gas prices, the inflation, hang it all on Biden. Obviously,
well, that's an interesting hypothesis. That really is a very interesting hypothesis.
Yeah,
because you can kind of see them trying. I don't think they're being terribly successful as yet, but they're trying to shift the narrative here.
They're trying. But as long as he's there, it's not going to work, I don't think.
No, I agree. I don't think it's going to work either.
In my opinion, was the fact that the same Democratic shill media outlet, New York Times, that covered up the Biden laptop during
now they're
outlet that threw it out there. So obviously they were told to do this by someone at top. So that to me is a sign that we've
the plan from the beginning was to get rid of Trump, and I have no doubt in my mind that they held the laptop in reserve because they knew that they'd have to get rid of this nutcase as well.
Yeah, and I haven't.
The primary objective was to get rid of Trump,
right?
And it wasn't even because Trump was Trump or any of that stuff. The reason they had to get rid of him was he was the catalyst for this wave of so-called populism around the world. That was the problem, and they had to get rid of the leader of that wave.
Now, you know what I find interesting about that in Trump is. So the Europeans, when he was there in office, seemed to hate him, primarily centered around his requiring them to cough up the money in regards to their defense in NATO, 2%, pay now, render unto Caesar. And they didn't like that. They didn't like that at all. But I think the winds have changed because even back then, when they were all crying and complaining about having to pay what they are owed or what they should be paying anyways, right? When they were crying about that, even though France was crying too, let's not forget, Macron has the wet dreams every night of a European defense force that he can lead. This would be great. He's got another 5 years. He's locked in. Let Trump get in, and Biden or Macron will be like, yes, Europe, let's pay our share. Let's go ahead and rearm. And they're already doing it. Everyone's doing it. Germany.
Yeah, they're doing it.
That's side of this weapons to Ukraine thing. They're stockpiles that will be replenished.
The problem in Europe is what the problem in Europe has always been: France and Germany.
Right.
And I honestly don't see either country willing to go along with a European defense force that the other country is going to lead.
Yeah. I don't see that either. I don't see it either. But I'll tell you what I do see in like a long-term thing, and I know they will make every effort to head it off. I in like a 10-year, 20-year thing, I see Russia and Germany becoming very tight. And I do too. That's like, the worst fear.
I do too.
But I see it happening. I kind of already see it now. It's not being shown. They're pretending like they're not, but
let's look at it this way.
They drag the hell out their feet in every aspect of these sanctions.
I agree with you about Germany, but here's why I agree with you. I take the longer view of this rather than it's in Germany's best interest in the short term. Germany, after the unification in 1871, Germany became the power in Europe.
Right.
Still is, this is the unfortunate truth of the matter.
Economically,
economically, and that translates into potential military. Everybody knows this, and that's why everybody's still afraid of Germany.
No more BMWs.
No more BMWs. It's time for it's time for Panzers. But anyway, the problem that Germany, I mean, if you're German, take the long view. When Germany tried to play the Western game with the West in World Wars I and II, it came out on the short end of the stick. Yeah. So it's time to rethink and maybe look at our friends, the Russians, a little bit differently.
Definitely, yeah.
Because, in a case can be made that Germany was basically used by the West, and particularly the city of London, as the cat's paw, being the only country in Europe strong enough to take on the Russians.
And the number one country in the Europe hurt the most by all of these sanctions.
Yes, precisely. So, if you're German, I'm thinking you've got a historical case, you've got a cultural case, you've got a geopolitical case that you need to rethink your game vis-a-vis the West and rethink your game vis-a-vis Russia.
Okay, so we both think that's possible. Let's square that with the fact that we've got Germans essentially doing biowarfare on Slavs, right? In communion with Nazis. So we could very well be talking about factions in Germany, of course, but it seems clear to me there is a whether it's stated as such, a full-blown Nazi faction in Germany that wants to do the same thing.
Let me put it to you this way. Let me put it to you this way. I've been trying to wake people up to that very thing that you just said. That one of the deep factions in the German deep state is nothing but the same old Nazi international.
There it is.
And even then, you're dealing with them. You're dealing with another element of the German deep state that goes back to Prussia.
Of course.
So you're dealing with something in Germany. Just look at Helmut Kohl. If you don't believe me, look at Chancellor Kohl. Chancellor Kohl was the chancellor during German reunification. He was the mentor of Angela Merkel. He left Angela Merkel a pretty hefty military. Yeah, and I mean really, really hefty. And she just kind of let it all go to seed.
Yep.
But Kohl, if you dig and scratch long enough, you're going to find all sorts of connections between Kohl and a lot of neo-fascist organizations like the Silesian Expellees Society and so on and so forth. So those connections are there in Kohl's government. They were certainly there in the first post-war West German government of Konrad Adenauer.
Oh, yeah.
Kurt Georg Kiesinger and Ludwig Erhard were both highly placed Nazis during the Third Reich, and they became West German chancellors, no less. So, and Willy Brandt, the chancellor everybody loves to love, had that Nazi, Dr. Walter Hallstein, whose brain plan for the European Union is what we're dealing with now.
Right.
So, it's there, folks, whether you want to admit it or not. Are we
saying then that, because so I agree with you that this Nazi International, I think after the war, it split into two factions, or maybe it was just one that kind of disseminated out from Argentina or Latin America, right? So we know one went down there, but then another faction went to the U.S. And, just look at America today. It is fully fascist. Let me just remind folks, fascism is not just like being on the right. It means corporates and governments in the bed together. And that's
corporate America. Socialism. It's the doctrine of the left. And that's pretty much America.
A more fascist country than America right now. But
right now, yeah.
So I think so we're saying they went home? Is that what we're saying? They came into America, switched the ideology, based in Argentina, and now they went home? Is that what we're saying? Because they're in Germany now, where they might not have been prior.
I fully believe that the Nazi International, that part of it stayed in Germany. That's very clear from the post-war German governments.
Yeah.
So in other words, you're dealing with the same old Nazi International that dispersed part of itself to this country, part of itself inside the Soviet Union, part of itself down to Latin America, part of itself to the Muslim world. You're dealing with the same old group of people. And there's part of me that honestly entertains the Madrid Circular view of this current Russia-Ukrainian conflict.
Oh, please elaborate.
Well, the Madrid Circular was this circular that appeared in the 1940s, late 1940s, from the part of the Nazi International associated with Otto Skorzeny in Nationalist Spain.
What was the name of Tetons, right? The author, Tetons.
No, Tetons was a guy that exposed the Madrid Circular, but he was not a Nazi.
No, I thought that was the author of the circular. Wasn't that his name?
No, Tetons was the guy, was a German Jewish man that wrote those books.
Germany, Kremlin. That's the other.
Right. He was one of these people trying to expose all of this.
Mm-hmm.
But the Madrid Circular was a circular that basically was circulated amongst the post-war Nazis, that they needed to support the United States involvement in the Korean War. The reason being that only when there was conflict between the United States and the Soviet bloc could the Nazi International have maneuvering room.
Mm-hmm.
And there's part of me that looks at this Russia-Ukrainian conflict as just another version of that sort of thinking, that this is the kind of maneuvering room that a fascist international would want. Well, who do we see right now on the world stage trying basically to put into place a global fascism? Our good old friend Klaus Schwab.
Right, there you go.
A German whose father was a Nazi.
Right.
who worked for a German company called Degussa. And if you dig around Degussa long enough, you're going to find that, oh golly, what were they involved in Nazi Germany? Well, A-bomb. And the other thing that they were involved with was A-bomb for South Africa in the 1970s.
I remember that.
Yeah. Degussa was the one that sold South Africa all of their uranium enrichment technology. So, as far as I'm concerned, you're dealing, this is why when this started and the Russians started pointing out that, hey, those people in Kiev are a bunch of Nazis, but our problem isn't there. It's the Nazis in Washington. I sat up and listened.
Oh, yeah. The other interesting thing about that is specifically in regards to the biolabs, the Russians came out and said that, first off, they said they have a massive amount of documentation.
Yes.
But the second thing I find very interesting is they said that we have the names of the exact case officers and people involved. And
I can believe it.
I find that supremely interesting in regards to you talking about a faction that always stayed behind in Germany. Because in my opinion, the ones that were sponsoring this sort of thing with the Americans are probably part of this faction, and the Russians have their names.
Do you know what else the Russians just told? What they just did? They also just declassified the files that they have on Hitler's pilot, Hans Bauer.
Did they?
Yes, they did.
When was this?
In the last week.
Wow.
Now, again, I'm sorry, folks. I think what that is it's a message.
Oh, of course. Look, Putin personally does not bluff at all.
No, he doesn't.
They don't do things like pointlessly or willy-nilly.
No.
So if he's threatening you or dropping information, I'd pay attention.
Well, if he's dropping information like that, yeah, I'd pay attention, because that means he can drop a whole lot more.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of threats, and you're talking about the full Russian response, because like I said, they really have not responded really in any fashion.
No.
They did pass, so they've been given warnings, like they do. They'll respond when their line is crossed. But Ukraine has been trying to do these little pot shot strikes at various Russian territories.
Yes.
Not effective, can't do anything, but it kills people, So Putin came out and was like, look, if you keep doing that, and he's this precise language, he said, if you guys don't stop that, we're going to start targeting your decision-making centers.
Yes.
And that to me, I kind of thought to mean political people around Zelensky.
Yeah. This is why I say I'm very concerned, Schwarzenstein, about an escalation of the asymmetrical warfare.
Yeah.
Because when Putin is saying that, what he's telling the world is, yeah, we can take out the Kiev government right now with drones, with smart bombs, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But when he's talking like that, I suspect that what he's really saying is, we can send in the Spetsnaz assassination units.
Yeah.
And make this extremely surgical.
Well, yeah, and let's not fool ourselves. Spetsnaz is already operating. How do you think those targets
Of course.
Yeah.
And this is my problem here, is if Mr. Globaloney thinks that they're going to get into their bunkers at Mount Weather and coordinate all of this, they've got another thing coming. I would not be surprised, and I'm being very frank here. I would not be at all surprised if Russian units start taking out, by direct assassination, people like Soros and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
I would not be surprised.
Didn't some country issue an arrest warrant for him?
That was Russia.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
That's very telling.
Yeah, it's very telling. And to me, that simply means we're serving notice. We're coming after you.
Yeah, and not only that, we know who the individual players are.
Yes, exactly.
We're not this amorphous bureaucration. We know what they are.
Right. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. And I give it a time frame of about 3 to 5 years before we see indications that this is exactly what's going on. But
yeah, I think you're right.
I just don't see any other way. This has become an existential matter, both for Russia and for Mr. Globaloni. So they're going to take the gloves off, and they're going to try and do it in a way that does minimal damage to civilian populations and infrastructure, because they both need their population base
To be on board, yeah.
to be on board and to preserve their own power. So this is going to turn into an asymmetrical covert war real fast. This is going to be like The Godfather on steroids.
I find it. So I told you, I mentioned Putin and his threats and how they should always be taken seriously.
Yeah.
So he issued two, I believe. One that I'm thinking of right now. So this one was in regards to the NATO, Western powers, talking about trying to ship in like more heavy weaponry.
Yes.
Which, he's not concerned about the weapons, because let's be frank, that it's never going to even get to the battlefield.
Right.
Slovakia or Slovenia brought in the S-300. They took it out the day they put it in place. No. You're going to Poland wants to give the Ukraine 100 tanks for what? How are they going to drive them? Who's going to drive them? Where are you going to get the fuel? So none of this is going to do any good whatsoever. But Russia doesn't like it, and so they said, look, the moment it enters Ukraine, it is a target, and we're going to take it out immediately. And so. So what he was saying was that if you guys keep doing that, and then if any Western power were to try to intervene, he said that the response will be, he said, you will, how he words things, but he said the response will be lightning fast, or you will face a lightning fast response that you can't imagine, you've never seen before, or something to that effect.
And I'm glad you've mentioned that.
Or the Iskanders. I don't think he was talking about that at all, nor this nuclear test. I think he's talking about something else.
I'm glad you mentioned it, and I'm glad you mentioned the nuclear stuff, because Russia's also been giving warnings about nuclear war.
Yeah.
And what people have to understand is that Russia never, ever fully bought into the idea that a nuclear war is unfightable and unwinnable.
Right.
This people have to understand. And in addition to this, and I'm gonna go all orthodox on everybody for a brief moment here, because this is important for people to understand. The Russian Orthodox mentality would rather see the world go up in flames than surrender their national identity and culture. It's just that brutally honest, folks. And you will find them already talking like this in Russia. Well, we will simply die, but we'll go to heaven, but the West will just die.
Yeah, I totally believe that. Rather than take on that ideology and so forth. Yeah, I can see.
Right. They will do that. But here's the problem. When Mr. Putin is talking about lightning fast response, and it's going to come out of nowhere, I think
nothing you've ever seen.
I think he has two things in mind. One is this covert warfare response that I've just outlined.
But I think it goes beyond cyber.
And I think it goes to wet works.
Yeah.
Okay. That's quite frankly what I think he's talking about. Wet works. Outright assassination of
decision makers.
Soros, Gates, Schwab, the whole 9 yards, the whole rotten crew. And a few central bankers probably mixed in.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for good.
Karstens, Christine Lagarde, all of that crowd. But the other response I think he's talking about is nuclear, because the Russians will use a nuclear strike in a military decapitation sort of way.
Yep.
Don't think the Russians are going to target your big cities. That's probably not on their game plan at all.
America wants to, I think we envision those strikes as like shock and awe on the population.
Right.
Russia probably wouldn't see it that way.
No.
Shock and awe on the military, if anything.
No. The Russians, this is not to say that they're not willing to cause some civilian casualties.
Sure.
But their military doctrine is very different, and the Russian nuclear response, I think, will be designed to be escalatable. In other words, it will start out tactical.
Yeah.
And then it will go operational, and then finally strategic if need be.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of the purpose of the Sarmat test, the nuclear rocket they did.
Precisely.
And in fact,
right. They're sending messages all the time.
Oh, they are. And Lavrov was saying that what the West is doing, they call it mirroring. When the West is talking about all these concerns about the Russia using nukes, when they never ever said that. This was said first by Zelensky. And so what Lavrov said, like what the Russians doing is they're mirroring. So when they're saying that Putin or Russia might be considering a tactical nuclear strike, that's what they're considering, which is then why Russia did the test.
Now,
we can reach out and touch you where you can't touch us because they've got hypersonic dominance right now.
In the chat room, a very interesting comment from someone that says we're supposed to be horrified about Schwab or Soros or Gates taken out. No, we're not. If indeed that is the Russian game plan, what I'm suggesting here to that person in the chat room is and what Schwarzenstein and I are trying to get across is if you go back and listen to Putin's speeches, beginning with that very famous speech he gave in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference.
Yeah.
If you listen to him carefully, Putin has been carefully targeting the disenfranchised in the West.
Absolutely.
He has been targeting you and me, the vanishing middle class in the West.
Yeah.
And the reason he's doing that is he's trying to suggest to us, I know who you are complaining about. So if part of his lightning response is to take those people out, what he's doing is he's playing his hand to that populist crowd in the West.
I could see that, but
I can easily see it.
But the only problem I see is that it's not spelled out. When would you spell it out and make it clear?
He would spell it out after the deed was done.
Okay.
And in fact, if he were clever, and he is, let's remember this. If he were clever, he'd let the Western media themselves spell it out.
Well, now you took my next point out of my mouth was that I think you're right. And that's why they clamp down on RT so hard, because RT is effective. You can look, I watch RT quite frequently, and
I do too.
Find that they may throw some spin my way, but the fact is they don't really lie much. Certainly not about like what's going on. Like this is what happened, period.
Yeah. If he were to do that, if he escalates a covert war, including wet works in the West, he'll let the Western media expose it. Oh, Vladimir Putin was behind those assassins that took out George Soros.
Yeah.
And he knows what the people's reaction in the West is going to be. Well, good for him.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. That would be the best move.
Yeah. And the Western media is stupid enough to do it.
Yep. They are stupid enough to fall right in line.
They will fall. They will fall for that so fast. It's not even funny. I mean, what I'm sure you've done the same thing. Watching the Russians the last few years has been very entertaining in a certain way.
Yeah.
Because they're just always ahead of the game. They've been playing these people for at least since Peter the Great.
Right. They've been dealing with them for a while.
Exactly.
So in that kind of great game spirit, let's switch gears a bit and talk about some of the other countries and their responses. So what I really want to mention right off the top is Japan. So there was, I believe it was from a meeting, one of the most recent meetings they had, or whatever, where basically Russia was giving Japan an ultimatum. They were basically telling them to, get on with it or get off the pot is what the message was. And I forget what it was in regards to, right? But they were told to pretty much make a choice, right? Either you're going to back America on this play or back us. And Japan chose. Certainly when it came to the sanctions, right, on sanctioning Russia, Japan fell in line. And so I think that the little seemingly budding rapprochement that Japan and China had, or excuse me, Japan and Russia had going on, I don't think that's real good right now.
Well, I don't think it's real good, but I don't think it's on hold.
I don't think so, but they did some diplomatic stab at Japan over the Kuril Islands, so they're not happy, and they're making that known.
No, no, they're not happy about it, but we have to remember that Japan, the previous time that the Russians were threatened with sanctions and being kicked out of SWIFT, let's remember what the Japanese did.
What was that?
Because that's disappeared right off the radar screen right now. The Japanese allowed the Russians to use their Pacific Rim credit card clearing for financial clearing.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah, that was a huge one. The Japanese, in other words, said, the Japanese are very clever because they will mouth support for the United States and the West like nobody's business. But you have to watch what they actually do. Because what they're doing is telling a very, very different story. Remember that last year, Japan and India signed an agreement for mutual logistical support to their militaries. Now, that's not directed against the United States. That's directed against China. But what they didn't tell the rest of the world, and what I strongly suspect is a secret protocol in that treaty, they did not tell the rest of the world how they were going to settle accounts for that mutual logistical support. I guarantee you the dollar is not involved.
Oh, no. Oh, no. And in fact, it's funny because you are correct, right, that India historically has had its issues with China and also with Pakistan, who also then supports China. But in this latest situation, we have India and China on sides with Russia against the West.
And even getting friendly with Pakistan.
Yes. And there's another, well, I won't call it a color revolution, but they certainly overthrew Imran Khan.
You know what I think, Schwarzenstein, about this whole current geopolitical situation, particularly because you've mentioned India, China, and Pakistan. I think we're at the, and you'll understand the reference. I hope everybody else does. I think we're at the War of the League of Cambrai moment 2.0.
You know what? We've had enough of you, Venice.
Yeah, we've had enough of you, Venice. We are all just pissed off.
Yeah, I see that.
And sure. The Pope has already played his hand and done his Fatima thing with Russia. There's no changing sides now, Francis. I'm sorry. I really think we're in that kind of situation that everybody's got the swords out for this country. But folks, the thing to remember is this country is one of two elements in this global financial structure. The other one is the city of London.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the more important ones.
Yep.
I'm trying to think of the name of this documentary. It's a great documentary all about the British, about the offshore things. It might have been called the Britain's Second Empire or whatever, but in short,
it's huge.
No, I know, right? So basically, in short, after World War II, Britain no longer became any kind of hegemon, right? Certainly not an empire no more. And the catalyst for that was the Suez Canal crisis, where forgive me, what's his name? Not Anwar.
Gamal Abdel Nasser.
There you go, Al Nasser. Basically told the British, like, kick rocks. We're not paying you nothing, no more, nothing. This is ours. This is Egyptian. They nationalized it.
Right.
And Great Britain they thought it was sweet. They tried to send in their fleet, right? Guess what? America slapped them down. You're not doing that. And in my mind, that was the signal moment of America running the world. When they
remember who the boots on the ground,
correct,
in the overthrow of King Farouk were.
Yeah, it was the Nazis.
It was the Nazis.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally think so. They
but you know, the problem that America became the hegemon. But what America forgot was something the Brits never did forget, and that is those tax havens are an empire unto themselves.
So that's what I was getting at. That's the point of the documentary. So I forget the date of the canal, but that
54.
54. All right. Yeah. So and it was America that slapped them down.
Oh yes, big
America
time.
Just said no. And I mean, that was great because that was America like coming into its own. Like, yeah, we won World War II. You know, the world is ours, literally. So that moment, though, them slapping down Britain, and normally that'd have been par for the course, right? You're going to tell us to do what? Send the fleet in, right? America slapped them down, told them no. Signal moment. So from that point forward, Britain started losing whatever it had left of its empire, right? Mm-hmm. The way they came out of it was the tax havens.
The tax havens.
And you notice how they only kept really, it's almost like they just picked the prettiest places in their empire and then turned them into the tax havens.
What they did, the British were very, very clever. Never underestimate. It's not called perfide Albion for nothing.
Yeah, right there.
But what they did was very clever. Is I am absolutely certain got wind of this hidden system of finance that the United States was setting up. And what they did was they positioned their big merchant banks in India, in China, in the Caribbean to be principal players and participants in that system, which they did. I mean, Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank is up to its earlobes.
I love how they fade people out with, acronyms and so forth. That's HSBC for folks who don't know. You might bank with them. That's a Chinese outfit.
It's a British Chinese outfit. Yeah. Anyway, Schwarzenstein, we've been going here for about 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I think probably I'm reaching the point where my voice and other things are going to need to say goodbye. But I want to thank you for coming in today, especially for being a good sport. That my pre-chat was an entire week early.
Yeah, I gotta say, I was so surprised when I turned YouTube on just to listen to some music and
I know.
It said, Dr. Farrell and Schwarzenstein are live in like an hour. I'm like, really?
I'm sorry to ruin your day of music.
No. I'm just laying up with my girl. So
it was entirely my doing because I forgot to take off of my Google Calendar that April notice. And of course, when I'm looking at April, I can't see May. So it never dawned on me I had you scheduled twice. So for doing all of that duty, I should give you stock in the company. But anyway, I want to thank you.
There we go.
No
problem.
I want to thank you for being a good sport about it.
Oh yeah, of course. Can I get a word with you when you drop offline or stop the recording?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, hang on. Anyway, folks, that is going to do it for Schwarzenstein and me today. Thank all of you for putting up with it, especially for that long period where the chat was going, but we weren't talking. But anyway, thank you, Schwarzenstein. Thanks everybody for showing up, and we'll see you on the flip side. Don't forget, folks, if you guys are members of the website and you want to do one of these one-on-one dialogues, drop me an email and we'll schedule it and get everybody on the dialogue thing. So anyway, thanks again, Schwarzenstein, all of you, and we'll see you all on the flip side. Bye-bye.